So here we are. My name is Deslondes. I'm doing an interview of Jim Deslondes Sr., my father, and we're going to have a single camera on him as he takes questions. Would you introduce yourself to the camera, Jim?
Yeah, I'm Jim Deslondes, born in the Panama Canal area in 1938, and I would like to say that I've done many things, but one of the most interesting things I've done is during the time when I was superintendent of housing for the Panama Canal. Some of this will be discussed in some of the questions that are going to come my way.
Okay, Dad, if I may call you Dad.
Yep.
That covers my first question. Where were you born? Did you want to elaborate a little bit in terms of the difference between Panama and the Canal Zone and any specifics?
Well, that's very easy to do. Everybody knows the history of the construction of the canal and how it split Panama in half. There was a 10-mile wide corridor all the way through from the Atlantic to the Pacific, where they built the canal. My grandfather, on my father's side, was from the United States, and his parents, as far as I know, came over from France. And my father was raised in Indiana because my grandmother had to take his body back. He was killed during the construction of the canal. He was killed by an arc from a 440 switch that hit some keys that he was wearing. He was in charge of the installation of the telephone system, and this was 1911. And you know, telephones were in their very early stage at that time.
All right. Let's get into specifics about each of your family members as we go. This, for the moment, is going to be about you, and then we'll progress into that as we go. My next question for you is, surrounding your birth, do you recall any interesting stories that surrounded your birth, periods in history, or stories that were told you by family members that were particularly interesting?
Yeah, I found the story that my father passed on to me, that his mother was pregnant when her husband was killed, and she took the body back, and he was buried in the United States. And she went on to Indiana, where her mother and father lived, and her father had been a major in the Civil War and was in business in Lafayette, Indiana. So she went there and gave birth to my father and left him there for 5 years, went back to Panama, remarried, and went back to Lafayette, Indiana, and brought my father back to Panama when he was 5 years old. And he was born in 1912.
Very interesting. So, let me see, that was a little confusing even for me as a family member. So your mother's first husband, your grandmother's first husband, who had your father, finish that statement for me?
Well, she was married to this fellow from, it's a French background, and after he was killed, she took his body back to the United States.
Okay.
And gave birth to him in Lafayette, Indiana. And like I said, she returned to Panama and remarried. She had a job as a telephone operator in those days, and the fellow she married was a employee of the canal. He had a big job in the administration building, where all the officials of the canal operated out of.
And that was officially your father's stepfather.
Yes.
Okay. And what was his name?
His name was Lambert Sheets.
Lambert Sheets. And so she held on to her original married name of Deslondes?
No.
She was...
When she married Sheets, she became a Sheets. But he never officially adopted my father, so he kept the name Deslondes.
He kept the name Deslondes. Very interesting. Okay. And you say he spent the first 5 years of his life back in the United States?
In Lafayette, Indiana.
Lafayette, Indiana. And was your mother there with him, or was he raised by other family members?
Not my mother, his mother.
Right.
No, she left and went back to Panama. Her mother raised him for the first 5 years, and he's told me all kinds of stories about those first 5 years of his life.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay, so we'll move on to question number 3. What is your earliest memory?
At the beginning of World War II.
Wow.
I was 1941, and I was born in 1938. And I remember the day they bombed Pearl Harbor, because the word got around to people living in the Panama Canal that the Japanese were headed to the canal to put the canal out of commission. And I can still see the town abuzz with trying to prepare for the Japanese invasion. They built a bomb shelter beside the house I lived in within a couple of days of the start of World War II.
Now that was the start of America in World War II, so it had already been raging in Europe for many years.
Right.
Okay, so that was December 7th, 1941.
Exactly.
And so you were approximately 3.5 years old?
Yes.
Oh, see. That's a very interesting first memory.
I played in that bomb shelter for several years. And my dad was in charge of what they call Section I. It was all the wartime lumber that went out to the South Pacific came through that thing that he operated. It was a lumber yard, and it was also a scrap yard. And he brought home a 30 caliber pod-mounted machine gun that he had the barrel loaded up so it could never be used again as a weapon. But here I was, a little kid with all my little buddies in the neighborhood carrying this. It took about 4 of us to carry this machine gun on a tripod around. But we had a lot of fun. We played war like it was the game to play.
Did anyone ever get a photograph of you kids carrying that gun around?
No, I wish they had.
Oh my goodness, that would be something. So, give this some deep thought. Who was the most influential person in your childhood?
My father. My father had he graduated from the high school there, and he won more letters in sports than any other person who had ever gone to that high school. And he was given a scholarship to go to Purdue University, and he played football and basketball at Purdue, but he only stayed there through 1 year, and ended up, he was going to play professional baseball, but he left Purdue, and I don't know all the details of what he went through leaving there. He was studying aeronautical engineering, and but he ended up being offered a contract to play baseball. He was offered for a AAA team, the Orioles, and he turned that down because he accepted a job with the Panama Canal. And getting a job with the canal was a good government job then and in the future.
So it would be safe to say that your father's heart was in Panama.
Oh yeah.
After those years.
Oh yeah.
So that would have put him somewhere in Panama for about 15 years when he was in his late teens before he went to Purdue. And
Well,
then,
he was. I guess I remember. He was 18 years old when he went to Purdue.
okay. And so his heart was there, and he turned around and came right back.
Yeah.
And
Well, I guess there was a lot going on at that time. If I was born in '38, I guess they had all gone through the Depression years, and
tell us a little bit about the influence that your father had over you, and in what regard?
well,
What was his?
that's a hard one for me to deal with. He was such an athlete that they expected so much out of me, and I can remember him throwing baseballs at me when I was 5 years old, and baseballs would bounce up and hit me in the chin and all that, even though I turned out to be a good athlete. But I guess it was just hard. He was like the local hero, and it was hard growing up as the son of a local hero. But
Sports
so
had a
anyway,
big influence over
a little
over
later,
small
when I
society.
was about 12 years old, I got into golf, and I can remember him making a joke about it. He says, "You like this sissy game?" And I said, "I like it very much." I found these golf clubs in a garbage can on my way home from school one day, and brought them home and started hitting. There were golf balls in this bag, these old wooden shafted clubs, and I started hitting balls all over the empty lot near us. And he finally accepted that I really liked the game of golf, and he could never beat me as I grew up. I'm a retired PGA golf pro now. After retiring from the Panama Canal, I started living my dream. I had always dreamed of being a golf pro, and golf became a big part of my life.
So sticking with your childhood for just a few more questions, did you have any pets as a kid, and what kind, and how did they participate in your life?
Oh, like every little kid, I think, had a dog. And I had a dog named Yippee. And when I got drafted into the Army in 1956, and I came home after basic training, I got a ride back to Panama from the United States. And I sat down at the dinner table right after getting home, and I looked around and I said, "Where's Yippee?" Yippee had followed me every place as a kid, and they had to tell me that they had to put Yippee asleep, you know.
And so Yippee was it.
Yippee
he was the dog that was
my
stuck
dog.
in your mind.
Yeah.
All right. So over the long summers of your childhood, any particular memories stick out in terms of activities and things that you did that you really, really loved as a child during the summer?
Panama was probably one of the greatest places in the world for a kid to grow up, because almost every kid down there played almost every sport. We had some of the world's best fishing was down there. Most of us learned to spearfish when we were kids. Almost every one of my friends could go without a tank and dive down to about 100 feet and shoot a fish and come up. But that was just a big part of living there.
So speaking of games and sports and activities and hobbies, out of all of those, which one rises to the top in your mind as one of your favorites or your dominant favorite?
Well,
or many of them.
I dreamed of having a good-sized boat when I was a kid. I stood on one of the some of the biggest black marlins when I was a kid, because I'd go fishing with my friends. There was a pier there, and the people would come in from these deep-sea fishing trips with these big marlins, and it was quite a thing to someday being able to buy one of these boats and have it and use it, and that was a great part of my life. Being able to go down to the Pearl Islands on a weekly basis. I ended up chartering that boat, so I'd work all week with Penn Canal and then take out charter people on the weekends. And I kept a captain on the boat who would take out people that would charter the boat during the week. So between the two jobs, I did okay financially.
So did you have any nicknames as a child other than Jim?
They used
Jimmy?
they used to kid me and call me Muscles in high school.
Muscles. Did that catch on?
Oh, I don't know. Then I could hit golf balls pretty far. So before Freddie Couples was named Boom Boom, I was called Boom Boom.
Boom Boom.
Yeah.
And what did that mean?
Well, you could hit a golf ball far.
Boom Boom. Okay.
In fact,
So you beat Freddie Couples to Boom Boom.
yeah, let me tell you one of my, when I was in the Army, out of basic training, I went to Fort Bragg and was in the 82nd Airborne Division, going through pre-airborne training, and I got a call to report to the Officers Golf Club at Fort Bragg, and a golf pro by the name of Dow Finsterwald, who was a very famous golf pro, who knew about my golfing ability. He had been a captain in the Air Force at Pope Air Force Base, and he recommended me to the pro to work there. So I got selected to work there. I spent the rest of my Army, 2 years in the Army, working as an assistant golf pro. In fact, I felt like I was living my dream. So,
That was just the beginning of your golf dream, I imagine.
yeah, it was.
Someone was actually paying you to golf, and it was the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. A few more childhood questions. How about fear? What were you the most afraid of as a child?
My father.
Your father. Just point blank.
My father didn't put up with any foolishness. He was really strict.
So do you recall any interesting stories that were related to you and your elder relatives that you have never forgotten and you think are worth telling to the audience?
Well, that's difficult. That is a very difficult one. Because we lived in the Panama Canal, we were thousands of miles away from my older relatives who lived back in the United States after they retired. And so I had very little contact with grandparents, because most people that grew up in the Panama Canal Zone had the same experience. The only time they ever met their grandparents or spent time with them is when their parents got to go back to the United States on vacation, which was like every 2 years. We'd go back and we'd go out to Lafayette, Indiana, and we'd spend about 20 or 30 days with my grandmother back there. So that's the only real contact I had. My mother's father, who also worked for the canal, he was my grandfather on my mother's side he graduated from college in Missouri in the late 1800s and went to work in Washington, D.C. and got recruited to go to Panama. And like I say, he was an accountant, and his wife, who was my mother's mother, she died when my mother was only 15 years old. So he ended up retiring and going to California. And I only remember seeing him 2 or 3 times during my lifetime. But he used to tell me stories about the construction days. He was a fisherman and a hunter, and I've got some pictures of him with shooting, the deers that he shot in the jungles there at Panama, and I've got pictures of him with very large corvina, which is one of the best fish in the world to eat. So that's all the memories I have of that side of the family.
So growing up, did you have a best friend? And tell us about him and what was his or her name?
My best friend was a young man by the name of Sandy Hinkle. He ended up going to Duke University. He was a straight A student in school and got recruited to and given a scholarship to go to Duke University, and he was on the golf team there. And he was just a great guy, and he died just a couple of years ago.
Sandy Hinkle.
Sandy Hinkle.
Thick as thieves, or?
Yeah, we played golf together almost every afternoon after school.
And what is the most, I guess, unscrupulous crime that you ever committed together?
No, he was a straight arrow.
Straight arrow, so were you.
Yeah.
And we'll go down in history that way.
I wasn't a straight arrow.
And so, my question was going to be if you were still in touch with him, but he passed away a few years ago.
Yeah. He was a straight arrow all of his life, and as I understood, because he stayed there, he married a girl from Panama, whose family was very influential in government affairs in Panama. But anyway, Sandy ended up going to too many cocktail parties and started enjoying his drinks. And the story is that he had too much to drink, and he stumbled on the stairs at his house and fell down a flight of stairs and got killed.
Oh, goodness. And how old was he when he passed away?
He was probably just 2 years younger than I am right now. I'm 83.
And so looking back to high school, did you have a favorite subject?
I had a very tough high school year. I really got into a tussle with one of those teachers in 10th grade. She was picking on a Panamanian girl who couldn't say yellow. She would say jello. And the teacher was screaming and yelling at her. And I spoke up and said, "Leave her alone. Can't you see she's about to cry? You don't have to browbeat her because she can't say yellow." And the teacher threw an eraser at me, and I caught it and threw it back at her. And the story got around among all the teachers, and I struggled to get through high school.
You were known as a loose cannon and potentially violent.
Yeah.
Because you were sticking up for a young girl.
No, because I threw the eraser back at the teacher.
That's a tough road to hoe.
Yeah.
Let me back this off a little bit. Okay, and we've got about 6 minutes left, so if you can get through that, this particular camera only does 30-minute segments, so it'll give you a mandatory break, and we can do another one another time. So my next question was going to be if you had any particular teacher that you remembered, good or bad. So we heard about that. How about a good one?
Her name was Miss Brigham, and I'll never forget her. And she became an alcoholic, and I don't know what had happened to her. But she said to me, she says, "You will never go anyplace in life," and I think I've tried hard to go someplace in life because of the statement she made. I became the assistant chief of the Community Services Division, and my last half a year with the Panama Canal, I was made temporary promotion to chief of the Community Services Division. While I was superintendent of housing for 10 years with Pan Canal, the treaty mandated that the different properties be turned over to the government of Panama, and I was managing over 5,000 houses that belonged to the United States government, and I was selected to be the one to officially represent the United States in the official turnover of these houses. And in today's economic times, I probably signed away over $1 billion worth of property to the government of Panama.
Well, we'll get into plenty of those stories later. Let's finish up your just kind of culmination of high school with, how about your favorite band or music back then?
Well, I played trombone and trumpet in the high school band.
Trombone and trumpet?
Yeah.
Wow. that's something I didn't know.
Yeah.
And what about bands of that era? So were you a big band guy? Because
Well, I'll tell you, when I got drafted into the Army, one of my good friends in fact, he was one of the top graduates of our class. We both were on a ship going to the United States. He was headed to West Point, and I was headed to basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Anyway, they formed a band, and I played trombone, so I got in this little band, and all we did is practice all day and play for the people, the officers, and the people that had families that were on. It was the United States troop ship, and anyway, and he ended up doing kitchen duty the whole time we were on, and here he is headed to West Point, and I'm just going to be an Army grunt.
oh wow, that's neat. And maybe coming to a close on this subject of,
By the way,
just
let me finish
early
that.
childhood. Go
Let
ahead.
me finish that. I also went to basic training, like I said, at Fort Dix. And the first thing I did when I got to basic training was go in and see the sergeant major in charge of the training company. And I said, "Have you ever had a marching band in basic training?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, I've talked to some of the guys. They can go to New York City and get instruments and come back, and we'll have a marching band. It's something you've never done." So I formed this marching band in basic training, and it kept me from having to do a lot of things.
Oh, that's terrific.
But they enjoyed, they had never had a band formed in basic training.
Now, after all these years, you think you could pick up a trombone and take off?
Absolutely not.
No. Wouldn't remember how to blow into it.
No, you lose your lip and you lose your skills.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then, in closing, what would you know, or what would you like people to remember about you as a young man? What do you think people most were impressed by you at that age?
Everything I've ever done, I've strived to do a good job. And, I'm no big deal, but I've done a lot of things. In fact, my next door neighbor here in Sun City, Florida, when we start talking and I tell them all the things that I've been into, they just have a hard time realizing that someone could do so many things. But coming from the Canal Zone, I was not an unusual person. Most people that come out of the Canal Zone have learned to do so many different things. It was a very special place to grow up in.
Well, Jim, Dad, we really appreciate that walk through 30 minutes of your memories of your life as a young Canal Zone boy and an American. And if you'll have me, I would love to pick up and continue on another day with leading into the first years of your careers and your education, higher education, and so forth. And
certainly, we can do that. But let me make this statement. I was interviewed by some professors from the University of Florida, and they did a documentary on my experience as the housing manager and superintendent on what I knew about life in the Canal Zone. And they have that film in their library there at the University of Florida.
Fantastic. We might have to look that up and include it in this footage for
The next